No.
Okay, great.
Here we go. Right. There we go. So I think we're live now. It's just pulling the camera through to the other screen. So I should be able to see us shortly, but I'm going to look here for the moment. So hello, everybody. Welcome to the Craft Distilling Expo, day 2. I'm joined today by a gentleman called Gilles Goemaere from Fermentis. The talk today is on solutions to produce great spirits, and in particular, we're looking at fermentation and yeast. So if I could hand it over to yourself there, Gilles, for an introduction.
Yeah, hi. So my name is Gilles Goemaere. I'm originated from Belgium, so live streaming from Belgium right now, and I'm technical sales support for the European zone for Fermentis. So it's giving any kind of technical support to the sales manager of the zones. Mm-hmm. So that's pretty much it. And I hope that you enjoyed the presentations. The presentation about Fermentis, and if you have any questions, I'm here to answer any.
Fantastic. It was. I have to say, I feel like a little bit of an amateur. I've watched it a couple of times, and I feel I need to watch it again. There was so much information in there, and it struck me that if you're getting started out with fermentation, that could maybe be a little overwhelming. If you were getting started beginning, as some of our delegates might be, what sort of advice would you give for those first steps of getting into all of this information?
Well, I think that the first and the most obvious way to look at this presentation would be from your target perspective. So if you want to produce a specific spirit, I'll just advise the person to go over the presentation and look only at a specific type of spirits. If you want to produce a whiskey, for example, yes, you have whiskey information all along the first part of the presentation, yes, and then you can jump right into the point number 4, where it's mainly about whiskey. So I would advise doing it that way.
That's something that I did pick up on with the tables. The way that it's a very helpful talk to have that and to keep that information, because the way you laid it out on the table, it did make it very easy to go to what you were looking for. There's probably a lot of people out there that would be a really valuable source of information. So thank you very much for sharing that with us. I found it really interesting how many different types of yeast there are.
Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome. And just all the possibility of the different flavors and the different reactions. It must have taken a lot of time to get all that information together. How long has Fermentis been researching all of this stuff?
Well, it's pretty much since always. So Fermentis is active in the drinkable alcohol. Let's say any fermentation that produces alcohol that can be consumed by the public. And our goal is to produce the highest quality standard in fermentation solution, of course, yeah, the yeast. And to do so, we have a high quality R&D department, and they make research to put yeast on the market, and in parallel they make applied research, so we can understand and we can know our yeast very, very well in order to be able to give such information to our customers. So yeah, it's pretty much since always. It's a never-ending job.
I was going to say, but is it obviously with yeast? Essentially, is there like evolution? Do you find new yeasts? Is that the sort of thing that grows and you find different ones in other places?
Yeah, well, we do have a yeast bank that is in the R&D center of Le Safre. And whenever we need to find a new yeast for a specific solution, let's say we have a gap and we want to fill it, we can screen inside of that bank. That's one of the possibility. The other possibility would be to select a yeast that is in a bank of a university, for example.
Okay.
Then we can work together to see what is the best fit and how to select it. So it's mainly the two ways we're going to use to put a new yeast in the market.
Brilliant. And here we have Gino joining us as well today.
Hi, yeah.
Hello.
Hi, thanks. I had some issues getting in actually.
Oh, that's the sorry about it. When we're watching the video on one screen, I've done it before. I've missed somebody and left them in the mating room for a minute or two. So I was trying to keep an eye out for you there.
Oh yeah, okay. Thanks.
How are you today?
I'm fine. It's the situation in Holland. I'm in Holland actually. Is a bit bad in terms of COVID.
Oh, I see.
We are in again in a partial lockdown, so it's that's a bit annoying because we just got out.
Yes.
And
yes.
Now we're back in, but I guess it's the same everywhere in throughout Europe. So we're just gonna have to sit it out.
Yeah, absolutely. It's just a kind of a muddling through the best way we can, really, isn't it?
Yeah.
Where were we? I was just talking to Gilles about yeast and the huge scope of possibilities, and he was saying about how you have different banks of yeast. I wondered as well, a question that people might be wondering, if they wanted to do something a little bit different, something non-typical, where would they get started fermenting something like, say, like peas or bananas or something a little bit different? With the information we've had on the pre-recorded video, there's a really good guide for using things for things. So where would you start with something a bit different that's maybe not so textbook?
That's a bit hard. Anything that contains sugar can be fermented. Question is, fermentation of bananas. They do it quite a lot in Africa. I'm not sure about the drink that comes out, if it's any good.
Yeah.
And then in this case, if you distill it, obviously you will transfer all esters that are also produced in a regular sugar-based fermentation. So I think it's possible. Like Gilles also mentioned in his presentation, for producing a cognac or calvados, obviously also there the substrate is not the regular barley malt, but it's grapes, or it can be apples, or it can be pears, or the juice from this. In terms of banana, I'm not sure if you could squeeze out easily the sugar, so you would make some kind of slurry, I think, and then ferment this slurry. So I think it's doable. We for sure have not tested this. Gilles, what do you think?
Yeah, well, I'm agreeing with you. I would start with sugar. What is the sugar content and the type of sugars? Is it starch based, like in grain, or is it more sucrose and glucose and fructose, like in fruit? And basically look at the screen selecting a yeast strain. There is a table there with all the yeast and the primary substrate, and I would go for whatever substrate is the closest to what you want to ferment. Of course, and there is many other layers of things you could check before to ferment something out of the box, but I would start from there.
Great. And something I noticed as well with some of the graphs, temperature is a very important factor as to the fermentation. Obviously, you do have outside factors of that. Say, for example, if your distillery is in quite a cold place, how would you go about raising the temperature of fermentation? Or in other words, cooling it as well. If you were somewhere quite warm, how would you moderate that? I'm guessing there's particular equipment for that, is there? Or is there like a technique?
Well, it all depends on the size of the installation. It depends also on the material you have, of course. So what we know is that most of the time, even in cold conditions, the yeast itself is going to increase the temperature during the fermentation. So it's going to be more before the fermentation, or at the end when the yeast is least active. It's very cold. It can have an influence on the fermentation dynamic at the end. And then it really depends on the size. The more volume you have, the more inertia you have, and the least you are affected by outside temperature. So a very small fermentation, you have to be more careful. A very large fermentation, you'll have more energy capacity inside of the fermenting liquid.
That's quite interesting. It was a little while ago, I went to a distillery and somebody was fermenting, and they weren't heating it, they just let it reach its own temperature. And they just operated on that basis, and they said they found it to be quite a smooth result for that. Would that be the case? Is there some science behind there? Without he called it forced fermentation, when you're pushing it to do it. Is there a notable difference there, do you think?
Yeah, it's
likely, yeah. It's likely, because what we find in beer, at least for ale strains, is that when you change fermentation conditions, and we looked at the gravity, pitching rate, and temperature, what you see there is you can really control and steer the flavor production in beer. For spirits, it would be very different, very similar. The only difference would be, if you do a full mash fermentation, which is done a lot in spirits. We don't have good data on that, under different conditions. But I expect it to be quite similar, because a yeast works at a certain temperature. For each strain, you have some optimum, but obviously you can always work around a little bit this temperature. It will still work. So if you don't have any controls, like Gilles mentioned, the yeast will simply produce heat by itself, just because it's converting the sugars to alcohol, and heat is released by that. At some point, if you have quite a big tank, you could reach a maximum temperature. That's way possible. So it would be unfavorable for the yeast itself. However, in many cases, reaching this unpleasant, I would say, a situation for yeast often results in a very nice production of flavors. Flavors are often produced in more stressful conditions. You also see it during normal fermentation, that most of the flavors are produced more at the end of fermentation. So when the conditions are getting more harsh for the yeast. Yeah.
That's really interesting, actually. Thank you very much for that. I've got a question. We have our first question in, care of David. And the question is, any tips for fermenting to make fruit brandy from 100% fruit sugars?
So it would be fermentation with only water and sugar. Then in that case, the fermentation will be very, very difficult for yeast. And so I highly recommend to use a nutrient. Of course, I did not talk about nutrient solution for that base. We have a brand new product that is called Spring Firm NAB3, and NAB stands for neutral alcohol base, which is exactly what the question is about. So I would recommend to use NAB3 because it's going to allow the yeast to have all the nutrients, vitamin and minerals it needs for performing a complete fermentation.
Fantastic.
And you need to use that then in combination. So for brandy, the CO16 yeast is a very good choice. So you need to use then the NAB3 in combination with this yeast.
Fantastic.
Yeah, thank you, Gino. Very nice addition.
Brilliant. And just to add there, David has also made a comment to say, great David Bowie pick, by the way. So I think that's to you, Gino. There we go. Sorry, slightly off topic there. David Bowie
no
does
problem.
do that to people. So I've actually got the presentation to one side, and I found it very interesting how you kind of laid out the sort of different yeasts for different alcohols. I suppose if for what we covered there, because you had the sort of the grain neutral vodka, whiskey was covered in rum. Are there any other ones, like maybe we mentioned brandy, maybe some other spirits that people might look at where you could go through some of the recommendations of yeasts now?
Sure.
Do you have any specific idea in mind? Because there's so many. When you look at the spirit world, the spirits that you find in Latin America, it's very, very diverse. So I wouldn't know where to start.
Okay.
So you know, to stay a bit in line with Gilles' presentation, the most frequently used yeast is the sap spirit M1. It's all over Scotland and Ireland. A lot of whiskey makers are using this. This is like the yeast classic. So if you want to do something new, you can try also some of the new yeast we have. So for instance, for whiskey, we have a brand new yeast called Sap Spirit D53. Don't ask me where the D53 comes from. It's always a bit of a challenge within Fermentis how these codes, you know, are picked. But this yeast is so the D53 is a typical yeast that we pitch for so-called new make spirits. It's way more fruity than the M1. So you can reach, you know, also after distilling, a way more flavorful drink in comparison to, for instance, the M1. And then depending obviously on the substrate, as Gilles also mentioned, there are other options. So we have some yeast that you know work in a wide range of conditions. An example is the HG1, for instance. You know, you can produce basically any type of beverage with that. It ferments really high, up to 18.5% alcohol, which is nice. You know, if you have a distillery and you can start distilling at a very high alcohol level, it simply saves you a lot of money, because the higher alcohol you have at start, you know, the less effort you have to put in to distill it. It's quite simple.
Yeah.
So to my knowledge, a lot of whiskey makers are and spirit makers are quite traditional, especially the whiskey makers. They some of them, you know, the new guys are more open to try new things and make like these new make spirits. And they are experimenting quite a lot. I'm working in the UK, and a lot of spirit makers are doing trials. Simply, you know, with their substrate, they add, you know, sometimes fruits, even to the fermentation just to come up with new flavors. A lot of these new producers are also doing combination fermentation. So they pitch not one yeast but two yeasts.
Wow.
Some start with brewing yeast to get typical more a complex palette of brewing flavors also in there, and then they pitch a second yeast to complete the fermentation. This is most time a spirit yeast because they are more alcohol tolerant. So there are as Gilles mentioned, there are so many options that you can do as a producer, that it would be handy to have some direction in you know
Yes.
what are people specifically looking for.
Yes.
As mentioned, you know, as long as there's sugar, you can ferment.
Wow, that's great. Thank you. That's really helpful. I've had a question come in, an anonymous question, and that is, what sort of yeast would you use to make rum from panela or evaporated cane juice? I did wonder this because I saw on the video there was the juice and molasses, and some people are using evaporated cane juice. I know some are in the UK, certainly. So what sort of yeast would we be looking at there?
I would go for the C70 actually. So the one that's also used to produce normal rum from molasses. I don't see much difference in you know the final quality of the substrate. It should be very similar.
Yes. Brilliant. Okay, thank you very much. That's lovely. So we've got that just there. Right, we just need a few more questions to come in. So if anybody's got any, now would be a good time. And while we've got a moment waiting for some of those, just wondering if you've got any updates on what the company are doing, any new information that you'd like to share, anything additional to the pre-recorded presentation.
Well, we have quite a lot of new products launched. Obviously, normally we do these launches at events, and now it's a bit hard because everybody's working from home. But we still have quite a lot of new products on the market. For spirits, the main new product is, as Gilles just mentioned, the NAB3. So it's a nutrient mix that you can use to produce hard seltzers. Hard seltzers are on the rise, really fast. So if you are, you know, a brewer or a distiller, this is something that you really need to look into, because the market is growing so fast. You know, you can make money with these products, and they are so close to, you know, to beer and to spirits, that it's an interesting product to use. Also, there you have a lot of options in you know, because this NAB3 is specifically developed for pure sugar fermentations. But you can imagine if you make a wort, it also works. So you can play around a little bit with you know, with your substrate, also to produce new kinds of hard seltzers. So I think this development still needs to start, but it will come for sure. Then we also launched a beautiful new product called DA16. It was targeted, or it is targeted in the first place for brewers, but also distillers can use it. It's this product is called Safbrew DA16. So this is a yeast enzyme complex, which is perfect to produce new beer styles like Brut IPA. So you can make a highly sparkling champagne style beer, which is nice.
Yeah.
You know, with the Christmas holidays coming up, you know, if you want to find or create an alternative for champagne or cava or prosecco, this Brut IPA is something you know, that you can at least try. And we have launched a low alcohol yeast, so specifically targeting the low alcohol market, because also this market is growing extremely fast. They expect a growth rate of around 7.5% every year until 2024. So it will be a multi-billion euro market in the end. So you know, if it should be in your portfolio in the future.
Absolutely.
And then we also launched 4 new cider yeasts, specifically for cider. They are very different because, you know, in cider traditionally there have not been that many options. So that's why we thought, okay, let's let's come up with yeast that will produce very different styles of cider. So you can make a bone dry cider, you can make a dry flavorful one, you can make a tutti frutti cider, you know, which is like a cider fruit bomb, and also a sweet cider. And as a cider maker, it gives you the opportunity to diversify a little bit. So if if you're used to using only one yeast on the substrate, so the apple concentrate that you use, you will obviously only produce, you know, a single cider, and with just by changing the yeast, you can increase your portfolio quite easily, because the conditions will be very similar for all fermentation. So it's an opportunity, I think, especially in the UK. You know, the UK are the world's greatest cider drinkers. And,
yes, we do like our cider.
yes, so there are options also there for distillers. You can also make a cider and distill that to have a nice spirit afterwards.
Wow, yeah.
Yeah.
That's quite amazing, really. It's just like I said before, the possibility. It's with using different yeast, you suddenly have this palette to create different things, and that's really, really interesting. And it's very, like you say, with the cider, if the fermentation situation doesn't have to change too much, you don't have to do too much to experiment, which is really cool.
Yeah.
We've got another question come in from Nevin, and Nevin asks, is there a resource you could recommend on stressed yeast and flavour production correlation? It's very interesting.
I know there's quite good literature, open source available by heart. I think it's 2 or 3 years ago now. Catherine Smart and Brian Gibson made quite a nice review on different stress conditions. So you can have high alcohol, you can have high sugar, which brings in a lot of osmotic stress. Back pressure. So this paper, I need to find it, but it's a if you Google a Smart or a Gibson and then stress yeast, then you will find this paper.
Brilliant, thank you very much. Have you got anything to add to that at all, Gilles?
Oh yeah, well, the thing is, when the yeast is in perfect conditions, you have very high chances of it going until the end of the fermentation, and also give you a very nice flavor with less of flavor and etc. What you can expect when you have highly stressful conditions is always a little bit the same. So you have higher chances of incomplete fermentations, so difficult dynamic at the end, which might result in some residual sugar. That's very, very obvious. What you can also expect is some shift in the aroma profile. And it can be in the right or it can be in the wrong direction. That's a possibility. And then lastly, you can expect some of flavor that are typical of stress yeast, which is most of the time acetaldehyde, so green apple flavor that is linked to incomplete fermentation, and also H2S, which is more rotten egg style kind of flavor, and it's frequent when you have a very stressed yeast towards the end of your fermentation. So, but that's just only general ideas, and of course, you can have more specifics when you look at the literature that Gino mentioned.
Fantastic. And Nevin says thank you for your answers there. So that's great. Again, just waiting for a few more questions to come in. I'm just wondering if it's worth just revisiting and touching on some of the information in the pre-recorded call. Not obviously to go over all of it, because that would not be possible with the time, but maybe just to touch on some brief points. If anybody's tuning in that hasn't watched it yet, what would sort of be the takeaways from the pre-recorded that you'd like to offer people watching today?
Yeah, I think you should answer that, Gilles, because you gave the presentation.
Yeah, but I'm really sorry, but I had some cuts during the question, so I didn't get the whole.
Oh, sorry.
The whole picture. Yeah, sorry. It's my internet
don't
connection
worry.
is pretty bad, actually. Yeah, so.
Okay. So from the video you did, for people that haven't watched it, because there may be some, if you could give them a few takeaway points, what would you like to give them?
Okay, yeah, I think, may I share my screen?
Oh,
is it possible? Because I could put up the some
to be
parts
honest
of the presentation.
with you, I'm not sure.
Otherwise, it's all right.
Sorry, it's because we're recording through Zoom, but through something else, and I'm just a bit nervous of pressing a button and cutting
it's all right. I'll just refer to the presentation. Then it's not a problem. Yeah,
if you like, if you like, I can comment.
I would say that the main takeaways would be, I think, the slides with tables. I think, and I believe it's a very, very nice starting point when you want to make a new kind, like Gino mentioned, maybe new make spirits. You can find some great ideas just looking at the tables. You look at the substrate and you see you have several matches, and then it's just a matter of you taking your matrix and then making several parallel fermentations based on those ideas, and then you test the results and you make a decision for yourselves. So yeah, I think the main giveaway would be those tables, which are always a great starting point. And then I guess that the selected yeast range also for a specific beverage are a great starting point also. And you had an addition, I believe, Gino.
Yeah, for me, because I just watched it this morning. For me, the main takeaway is that the options are unlimited. So if you want to be creative, you can. Because you can do so much with yeast in quite a simple way, actually. That not only thinking about a single yeast, but combinations of yeast, combination of substrate. You can make an unlimited amount of different drinks. And for me, what I always say is, the yeast brings in the spirit of the spirit. I mean, it's not because we are a fermentation company that we really stress the importance of the yeast, but it actually makes the difference. In your final product is the selection of the yeast. So with the current range that has been shown by Gilles, so the range specifically for spirits, you can already have unlimited possibilities. If you add to that, yeast from other ranges, like yeast from the brewing world, yeast from the wine world or the cider world, it can add a second layer of complexity in your final drink. So the key message is start experimenting, and because the options are unlimited.
I suppose that if you were taking it up, it'd be completely zooming, wouldn't it? If you got into it as a hobby, it's quite a fascinating exploratory science that you can do at home, which is just really interesting.
Yes, I do that actually. I'm quite active producer at home, both beer but also spirits. And it's quite amazing. You know, the nice feature about spirits is that they are all aged on wood, and this is also something that you can do easily at home. I don't have barrels myself, but I have wood chips, which basically do the same thing. You know, you can simply toss in some oak chips
Yes.
in a bottle and see and wait what comes out. It's I did some experiments with preparation of oak. So put it at different temperatures to release, you know, different kinds of flavors, which is it's really amazing. So, you know, it adds another layer of complexity to your drink, which is quite cool.
Yeah, I know somebody that uses chips actually, and I think he got the information from a friend in Normandy, I think he said, and it's a bit of a common practice in that area.
Yeah.
So he started doing it to make essentially like a sort of a cognac type thing.
Nice.
And it's very impressive, the effect after just a few days that they have.
Yeah.
Yeah, sorry, I'm digressing. So we need to take it back to the yeast.
Yes.
Yes. So if I'm a distiller, I'm just getting started. I've watched the video, which really does have quite a lot of information. So really my next steps, you can get started at home. What sort of kit do you need? I'm thinking sort of very early on when people are, maybe they don't have a distillery yet and they're thinking about it. What sort of equipment do you need? Are there any tips to getting started with that?
I'll let Gino answer that because he has a lot of experience.
It's a little bit depending on the amount of money you would like to invest. Obviously, there are plenty of homebrew equipment on the market. You know, all priced differently. If you are simply exploring, what I would do is first of all buy a simple bucket. They cost maybe £5 or £10, something like that. So you can actually do a fermentation at home. In terms of raw materials, you can buy in any brew shop and even online. You can buy malt, which is already milled for you. So you simply have to add water. You can start from malt extracts, which is even more simple. You add boiled water to that, and you can already start a fermentation. You don't need much of an investment there. For distilling, obviously, it's a bit different because you need to have a boiling kettle and also a condenser.
Yes.
So that is a bit of a higher investment, but also there, I think one of the cheapest on the market would cost around, I think in the UK, maybe £100 or something like that. You already have a simple, you can buy a simple still. And start experimenting. So the exact equipment is really depending on the amount of money that you want to spend. So I think this answers a little bit your question.
If I can make a quick addition, because thanks, Gino. It's a great starting point. I would just add this is if you are starting making alcoholic beverage at home, whatever the beverage is select a target and try to achieve this, because you can go in so many directions that you can get lost. So if you want to make, let's say, beer, start to make beer and stick to it for a while, because you are going to get better if you go back and back to that beverage. But if you do one time beer, the next time a fruit fermentation, and the third time you want to make a distillate, you're going to get lost because there are so many options. So I would say, yeah, select your target and then try to stick to it. And another advice, if you're starting up at home, is try to learn something every day. There are so many things to learn, so many information you can find in books. You can find some great information online also. You learn something new every day and you implement it, and the drink is going to get better every time.
That's really helpful. Thank you. That was all really good information, actually, and definitely the additional at the end. Pick your target. I'm similar with, because I cook a lot, and I focus on a dish now until I get it just right before I move on to another one, because I found you learn
exactly the spirit.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's very helpful. We've had another question come in, which is great. This is from an anonymous watcher. Would there be much difference to fermentation if you were making a rye as opposed to a malted rye whiskey?
I think so, yes. Maybe not so much fermentation. It's a little bit depending if it would be a full mash or a wort that you start from. Rye has can give great flavor additions. The only disadvantage of rye is it's very a pain in the ass to filter, to filter it out. So, but I think most people that use rye will filter it out, and then you simply start with a wort. So again, you will have the attribute of the grain in your wort, and then the yeast simply starts fermenting the available sugars, and depending on the choice of the yeast, you will develop different types of flavors. So the substrate, in this case rye, will attribute only the rye flavors, not typically. I mean, for the sugar profile, it doesn't make a lot of difference. The only pain in the ass, as I mentioned with rye, is it's hard to filter.
Right, thank you for that. I hope that answers your question there. I have another anonymous question. I'm not sure if it's the same person or not. So they've asked, can you provide some detail about your app? Is it right you have an app?
Yes.
Yeah, we do have an app. Yeah. At this time, it's an application that is related to 2 beverages. Oh, thank you, Gino. Perfect.
This is the app.
Yeah. So,
fantastic.
I don't know if you can see it.
I'm coming in really close.
So the application is free. It's available in Android and iOS, and it's targeting mainly beer and wine at this time. So you have 2 interfaces that you can change up, and depending on what you want information, you have one that is specifically dedicated to beer, the other one that is specifically dedicated to wine. I don't know yet if you're going to make a spirit one. It may be an option in the future, so we'll let you know if that's the case. Hoping it answers the question.
Fantastic, thank you. Do you think that's because there's obviously so many spirits, it'd obviously be quite a large job putting that together, so maybe that's why that's not there yet?
Yeah, that's true, and we also just hired a new technical person that is now specifically dedicated to spirits. So it's let's say a resource we did not have full time in the past, and that has just changed. So you might expect also a great project from Fermentis, and maybe including a spirit app in the future.
Fantastic. I should imagine something like that. It must be an enormous help to people to have all that information just at the click of a button, and to provide that free as well. That's really impressive. So anybody who's into wine and beer, I recommend downloading that. Do you know what it's called? Do you know the name of it?
Yeah, just type Fermentis.
Cool.
Yeah,
simple.
Exactly.
And then you will find it. Yeah.
Just what you think it would be.
Yeah. To add to that, in terms of the app, you have a lot of tools in the app, so you can do a lot of calculations. But you will also find scientific data on fermentations in different conditions. which can help if you are if you are targeting a certain flavor profile, neutral or very fruity. You can also find that in there. So there's quite a lot of information available. Normally, the information that we put out is launched every year at Brouwbevialen. We have a new brochure with tips and tricks.
Yeah.
But the app is always contains the latest information, so it's valuable to download.
Absolutely. So with the release you do each year, does that include spirits as well? Am I right in thinking?
We plan to go this year to Edinburgh, to the World Spirits Conference, and launch something there, but obviously it didn't happen. So that will be for 2021, I think. It's depending a little bit like at Brouwbevialen, which is targeting brewers, obviously. We focus on brewing products. In the wine, and we have the events that for the wine that focus obviously on launching wine products. And for distilling, we will do the same. So normally we choose a big event, go there, and then launch it. Also to be able to explain, to the people there exactly what is new. So that's probably 2021. Hopefully.
Great. So really, hopefully, yes. Fingers crossed. I should imagine then, again, to anybody watching, that's a really important thing to keep in touch with you guys launching that information, because that's my big takeaway from all of this is the huge amount of information, and it's constantly evolving as well. So it must be quite a beast to keep up with. So if you were, into fermentation, you really want to keep your eye on that ball and be keeping up with your updates.
Yeah.
Cool. Okay, I've got another question here. What is the Fermentis Academy?
Great question. So Fermentis Academy is, let's say, it's a brand under which you will have several different things. So the Fermentis Academy is part of the applied research I talked about before.
Yes.
So first, Fermentis Academy is going to be try to find the most important and accurate information about our yeast through applied research. And then the second point is about sharing that information. And we used to do it live. We made some great Fermentis Academies events, which was practically a full day dedicated to a beverage. Beer we made. There is also one spirit one that was organized in US, and also wine. And during that day, we invite the people producing that beverage, and we try to share as much information as we can, useful for them. So this is basically what is Fermentis Academy brand, and also is going to be hopefully for I don't know if I can talk about that. Well, that's okay. It's going to be a building. We're going to build a building with a trial station, with some place where we can make some research about beer, spirits, wine in our own facility, because we externalize that at this time.
Yeah. So to add to that, the Fermentis Academy basically is educating and sharing knowledge to train the makers, and also to get feedback from them. Typical difficulties. It's very detailed. So it is applied research, but a lot of scientific academic work is also shown and discussed. So we basically explain from A to Z what happens in fermentation. We focus on fermentation, obviously, because we are a fermentation company. And you can fill easily 2 days with that, because there's so much information available. So if we are now doing webinars, under the umbrella of the Fermentis Academy, where we have, I started one last week in the UK actually, focused on brewing to start. And from start to finish, you will learn in, I think it's 8 or 9 webinars. You will learn a lot and get a lot of also scientific background in it, which can also be helpful if you do tours in your distillery. It's sometimes nice if you get some information from somebody else to add to your own story to make it more complete. That's what I get as feedback from people attending. So because we give a lot of information that is really linked also to the scientific side, and a lot of makers are not always updated on the latest literature, and also not on the old literature actually. And most of the guys simply started because they like it, and they learn while they are going. And this is where we step in with the Fermentis Academy. We try to help them, in education, and we do that by simply sharing the knowledge that we have.
Yeah, I think that's a brilliant idea, because it's really giving people a huge head start in a hobby that they enjoy doing. You can go through the experimentation process and learn those things yourself, or you could get the head start with yourselves who have already done that, and get yourself into a better position to start experimenting a bit further.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I've got another question here, which is great because we're winding down now. We've got about 8 minutes left. So if anybody does have any last questions to pop in, please do. So another question here. Would you be able to talk a little bit about agave fermentation, please?
We should call Napo, our guy in Mexico.
It's a slightly different kettle of fish, isn't it?
It is. Yeah. Because I'm working in Europe mainly, and in Europe there is no agave fermentation. What I know is what they simply do is squeeze out or extract actually the liquids from agave. So they press it, and then they start from that base as a substrate. Obviously, typical spirits like tequila, mezcal are made from agave. It's a different substrate. It's a different base. But in terms of fermentation, there's not much difference. You can simply select, a strain that is very good for agave fermentation. In this case, I would go for again the C70. It has been proven to work very well for agave. To produce tequila, mezcal, I know it is used quite a lot in Mexico. So we have the proof on the market. In Europe, I'm really not sure if you want to start making tequila based on or mezcal based on agave, because where do you find it over here?
Yeah,
it's I don't know if that answers the person's question.
I'm sure they'll come back if it hasn't.
Okay. Okay.
So I'm guessing as we're starting to wind down now, we're really looking at those last bits of information you can give out to everybody. So, thinking about the fact that people watching this are looking to get into this or just getting into it at the moment. Have you got any sort of last pointers, last bits of advice that you'd like to offer?
Well, if a little bit in line with what you just asked, like if you want to start, with distilling, if you want to, and you don't have all the fancy equipment yet, then it's wise to start with the yeast, that can work in a wide range of conditions. A yeast that does not give you any problems. So one of them is for instance, Saf Spirit GR2. It's a yeast that works in a wide temperature range. It doesn't need temperature control. It's robust. It will always do its job. Other yeasts are a little bit more sensitive. So this is something to take home. Like, if you want to start as simple as possible, because if you are, you just mentioned you're cooking. It's really frustrating if you spend a few hours making a dish and it's not tasting very well.
Yes, it's awful.
It's similar if you produce.
Yes,
it's similar if you produce a spirit and you have to wait even longer, before you have it. It's not that rewarding if it's not tasting nice. So I would always start from something simple. Because that will allow to make a beverage that at least tastes nice, and then as you get more and more experience, you can start playing around with different yeasts. So I would definitely start with something simple. Just with one yeast, play around with that, and then if you think, okay, I know this one, you start with your second dish, and continue from there.
Yeah, and if I can add, I really like your advice, Gino. Start simple is always a good thing. Then you will want to improve, and I would say don't change everything at once. So if you need to change something, if you think that one parameter or another can be helpful, if it's changed, well, try to change 1 or 2 maximum, because if you change everything, you will never know what worked and what did not work. So it's part of building your own experience.
Yes,
it's going to be very helpful trying to apply that each fermentation or each distillation and so on. It goes for all the process, actually.
it is, and that's a very systematic way, isn't it? That's sort of very methodical, trying one change and seeing what difference that makes, and then what that does, and then trying another change. That's a very clever way of doing it, and the way you're going to learn fastest, I should imagine.
Yeah, and it applies to everything, to the recipe. If you want to try several composition in terms of grains, you can apply to that. If you have to go through a mashing or extraction process, it also goes there. It goes for fermentation, for distillation. You can apply that to the entire process, from the raw material to the final spirit.
Fantastic. Oh, that's great. Well, I think that's a good note to close it on. Thank you so much for joining us today, Gilles and Gino. Really helpful and really informative. Thank you very much indeed.
Yeah, thank you very much for hosting us.
You're welcome.
It was a very dynamic and very interesting question session. Very much appreciated.
Oh, you're welcome. Thank you very much. Take care now.
Yeah, you too. Thanks a lot.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.